Okay, for our afternoon board supervisor meeting, we have items 16 through 18.1. But out of courtesy to our Mayor of Salinas, Joe Gunter, and city staff, we've agreed to allow them to go first. And this is number 18.1, to receive a presentation on the status of the partnership with the City of Salinas and the County of Monterey to develop a permanent homeless shelter at 1220 Natividad Road and provide staff direction. And today we have our Department of Social Services Director, Elliot Robinson, and Manny Gonzalez, and also Anastasia from the City of Salinas, who's been working very hard on it. Good to have you. And then we'll give an opportunity to Mayor Gunter to say some words as well. You want to come first, Mayor? While I get the presentation.
I'll do it first because I have to give an opportunity. My hat's off to all the staffs from both departments. And we know that we're in the beginning stages of this, so the county council can take a breath. We haven't given them anything, made any promises we can't deliver. This is an opportunity where our staff's been collaborating, and they're going to bring it to the electeds. We're going to hear it at our council today. This is an opportunity for us to work together to come up with something a little better to trailer in a parking lot, or the old women's club, or a credit union they're going to tear down. If we can start getting these folks into some transition housing, get them services, and try to alleviate what's going on in the street. And I think my hat's off to your staff and ours for the good work they've done. I've seen the presentation on the way, and hopefully this will be the step in the first direction that we will hopefully move on. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and for your leadership on this as well. Okay. Take it away, Mr. Robinson.
Okay, so as you know, on September 19th, your board directed staff to develop an agreement between the County of Monterey and City of Salinas on emergency shelter services. And the direction included partnering with the city to establish a permanent year-round shelter at 1220 Natividad Road.
Can you put your mic a little closer, Mr. Robinson?
Sure, I'll try. Is it on? Okay. And then on September 26th, the board authorized the Director of Social Services to sign an MOU with the City of Salinas on shelter strategies and formalize that direction to establish a permanent year-round shelter at 1220 Natividad Road. Since that time, we've been partnering, trying to develop plans. We're still in the early stages, but we thought that it's timely to give your board an update on where we are on the path to a permanent shelter and on that path towards partnership. So, as you know, the 2017 homeless census and survey showed that there's a 23% increase in homelessness around Monterey County, both sheltered and unsheltered. The estimated count is 22,837 homeless as of the last homeless census. In the City of Salinas, the homeless population is now estimated at 1,361, which is an increase of 57% since 2015. And there's broad agreement that there are insufficient existing shelter and permanent supportive housing resources in the county. And we've been working together to address that need, and hats off to Anastasia, who's been doing a lot of the staff level heavy lifting. And we are also currently operating the temporary shelter at 111 West Alisal, which has been quite a successful partnership, as I understand. I personally have not received any community concerns about the shelter, and I haven't heard any coming through the board offices. And we did a number of things there to support the shelter, to make it more appropriate for the setting where it is, including putting up a privacy fence, expanding security services, and as you kind of work through those efforts to make a shelter fit into a community better, it's actually a community asset. And I think we can be very proud of what we've accomplished there. So our goals for the permanent shelter are that we can house at least 100 to 150 guests per night, that there be year-round meals along with the shelter, that it includes supportive housing, which are things like the housing and social services access, navigation to the health system, to the housing system, to the public assistance system, so that folks who are indigent can have access to the resources that help give them that independence in the community if they're capable of getting there, or the support to navigate the healthcare world and the counseling world to be more self-sufficient. And that we provide a pathway to permanent housing. And obviously, back to the setting, that a permanent shelter be architecturally designed to complement the neighborhood so that the neighborhood doesn't react to it as a detriment to their community. Other thing that has come up is an opportunity to also include permanent supportive housing on the site. There have been some discussions with the housing development community on that possibility, and it actually has had a lot of support from our nonprofit housing developers that they think that would be a good idea to actually include permanent supportive housing on the site as part of the transition process from shelter, permanent supportive housing, and also to address the reality that there is a shortage of permanent supportive housing for people who can live in permanent housing but need that support in order to sustain their independence. And now I'm going to turn it over to Anastasia for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Elliot.
Good to have you here, Mike.
Sorry.
Anastasia, good to have you here.
Thank you. Esteemed supervisors, thank you for hearing this item today and having me here. And I appreciate the work I've been able to do with Elliot Robinson and Manny Gonzalez. The site that has been chosen is the 1220 Natividad Road site. This is a 1.71 acre site. Just for reference, the Mid-Penn Moongate Plaza development that you've heard about was on a 0.82 acre site. And the number of units that are able to be on that site, we were able to fit in 90 SRO units. So actually 2 of those units will be 2-bedroom for a couple of people. So that is a lot of housing and a little bit of space. And so we have almost double here, a little over double the amount of space. Of course, there could be limitations to what could be put on that space due to the site conditions. I understand that there has already been a phase 1 completed on the site, which determining some of the environmental factors and remediation that might need to go forward with. So the next steps for all of us, if we agree further to continue on this road, is that we collaborate on a shared development agreement. We would like to aim for April 17th to finalize this agreement so that we're on a timeline to get this shelter built as soon as possible. We would create a request for a proposal for possibly a developer and a service provider. There is interest. I have worked with some of our housing developers in the community, and there has been interest to do supportive housing, which is the solution to ending homelessness, and a shelter. We would also add into the RFP the demolition of the existing building, development of the site, and shelter operations. There has been some discussion about retrofitting the existing building there, which could be a less expensive option and just have a shelter. I would say that any opportunity to build permanent supportive housing is a priority, should be a priority for all of us in this community. I would also say that we need to make sure that that we utilize the site to the best of our ability. The city would assist in developing a funding mechanism for the shelter with permanent supportive housing. The cost may scare you, the 30 to 70 million you're seeing right there. Don't be afraid. The Mid-Penn Moongate Plaza development costs $42 million, 90 units. That's normal. There's also a ground floor retail, and there will be supportive services for the life of the project for 50 years. All of that is built into the pro forma. We could also do that with the help of a developer that we have within our community. We could get tax credits. We could utilize federal funding. The city has CDBG and home that we have utilized in the Mid-Penn development. Those sources could also be a part of this. So don't stress about the funding. Project development timeline, it sounds scary, but 2 to 3 years. We're hoping we can move this as quickly as possible. So again, back to the costs. I know that's a big concern. If we were to only build a homeless shelter on the site, and forgive me for calling it a homeless shelter, I know that we want to have permanent resources to assist people who are in the transition into permanent supportive housing. We can work on the name later to qualify what it really will be, which is using best practices to create an environment where people come in and they get resources and they get the help they need and they get off the streets. So just to do the homeless shelter could be 5 to 10 million. Costs right now are very high. We know that construction costs are increasing rapidly due to a lot of construction in the Bay Area and in Monterey County. Supportive housing could be a cost of 35 to 60 million, depending on how many units we are able to build. So the total estimated cost could be 40 to 70 million with both the permanent supportive housing and the shelter. Public outreach is a big component to make sure the design suits the neighborhood and to make sure that the public is aware of what's happening. I actually yesterday was visiting a nonprofit in Santa Monica, and they had 4 developments within the small Santa Monica downtown blocks from the beach. Some of the supportive services housing, you could see the ocean front. So beautiful developments, and just to let you know, they were first on some of these city blocks. Movie theater came in, they had shops coming in, coffee shops, and big hotels. And you would have never known that there was permanent supportive housing for homeless people, formerly homeless people, living there. Beautiful developments. So I know it can be scary to think, wow, we're going to build some permanent supportive housing, but just seeing how happy and content people were, it was a 4 great products in downtown, right close to the beach, Santa Monica. So hopefully we'll be able to choose a developer to continue to work with the public outreach during the planning and development of the project. Under CEQA, right now this presentation itself is just a presentation, it's not subject to CEQA. The actual building, and if we were to go in and create housing, we would consult with both the city and county council to determine the CEQA determination. If we utilize federal funding, it would also be subject to NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So it does meet the City of Salinas' strategic plan, which is a safe, livable community, well-planned city with excellent infrastructure and quality of life. And I believe that this shelter and permanent supportive housing could support the quality of life for everyone in the community if people are off the street and have homes. So fiscal impact, it's kind of funny I'm saying there's no fiscal impact just for the presentation again. The fiscal impact, for the actual development we've discussed before. The next steps and direction is April 17th. We would like to finalize probably an agreement, and we've already begun a little bit discussing what type of an agreement we would have. We would like to bring that before you on April 17th. We will continue to collaborate on a shared development agreement for this permanent shelter, hopefully housing. That's all I have.
So now, whatever direction you want to provide, and whatever public comment is very welcome.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Anastasia, and Mr. Robinson for the presentation. I think, and for Mayor Gunter's involvement as well, as this is, I think, an example of 2 local governments working together to make something really great happen. And as we were talking about the 855 East Lower parcel earlier, and as was stated by Anastasia, local governments need to find that permanent supportive housing for our residents if we're going to be serious about addressing our homelessness crisis that we have in Monterey County. And I also mentioned that people want to see actual benchmarks that we're actually accomplishing things. And in Salinas, I point out that the 21 Soledad that was mentioned, the Paimet Peninsula, that's going to break ground this year. Already they have the Daiichi Village, senior housing nearby. I think it's called the Hacienda 3. It's under construction. Another one under construction right now. And so to have, we talked about East Laurel. There was another project that we have for veterans and affordable housing. And this would be another landmark project. The first year-round shelter with supportive services year-round, and then a place to move people out of a shelter to some places upstairs. And it was only a year ago we were disagreeing on finding this. Now we have a plan that's working great with no complaints here at the temporary shelter. And now we have a project that went from just looking at a shelter to have supportive housing on top of it. And we all know in local government that it's hard to find these types of sites, to find them, locate them, build support around them. So why not maximize the possibilities there with the site we did find and we do agree on? And this site got support from Salinas Valley Chamber of Commerce, the Salinas City Center Association is very supportive of this project. So this seems like it's a win-win. But I hope that this partnership that we have between the county and the city is seen as an example where hopefully our county can partner with other cities in the peninsula and perhaps South County, where we could also do some innovative outside-the-box thinking to make some these types of services available to our residents. And Anastasia, you pointed out that sometimes we have to get out of our own communities to see the good things that are happening elsewhere. Sometimes just sitting here, everybody's not knowing what to do, but when you go to some other communities that did take an innovative approach, you can see they can be beautiful and dignified housing that works for everyone in the community. And I think that's important to bring those ideas to the board, and hopefully down the road, I think some of us can go visit those to see with our own eyes what they look like and envision what's possible. So I'm really excited. Last thing I want to mention is that if anybody wants to really remember recently why a shelter is so important as a safety net, we just think about the storm. The storm now, the storms that happened a few years ago, the cold that a few days ago, the storms, the cold that's happened the last several weeks. When we're in our warm houses, you remember like how important it is to have a safe and warm place to stay. No human, no child should be able to have to live out in those harsh conditions. And our partnership here with our temporary shelter really showed the community that it worked, that it's being used to its maximum capacity. I think there were like 10 children staying there recently. The food is being served. But I think it's a success story, and I think we as a community, we should be proud of that. And when we ask, when we look at what's the greatest measure of the community of Salinas and County Monterey, should be that we did take care of and prioritize for our most vulnerable, our most needy residents in our community. I think that's a good reflection of any community. We're taking care of our own, and we're taking care of the most needy that's among us. And I also want to point out that I think there's some interest for the philanthropic groups. The community foundation is interested, perhaps, in trying to help us fundraise to offset some of the costs as well. Not to mention some affordable housing providers that can help us get those tax credits. So I really want to thank you, Fernando. I think this is a great update to hear, and also I think it reassures the business community and the community at large that we are serious about realizing this project. Other comments, Supervisor Phillips?
Yeah, I got to say, I was involved in this, and I'm completely in favor of the city and the county working together on what we do. It was the mayor and I got together on a Saturday morning and came up with the agreement of working towards the temporary shelter here, and then going to 1220 for the permanent shelter. The advantage of the 1220 was the building was structurally sound and we could get in and do something quickly, and we kind of promised the business community that we were going to move in that direction. I've been asking for 6 months, man, where are we going on this and how we're going? This is the first time I'm able to see where we're going. I mean, it's a beautiful project. It's just that I had the people that went and looked at that, and we got that in the hands of a nonprofit that was motivated. We could have done it for less than $1 million to go and do the impact and got moved in. It wasn't anything like this, but it was a project we could have got done for $1 million, and the community foundation was involved in it. And I'm not opposed to this, but I mean, we're completely changing the timeline, because I could be halfway, if someone had turned that over to a motivated nonprofit like we did Rancho Cielo, we could be halfway through of completing that. No one's told me what the cost of the tear down of that building. It's a cement block building that's structurally sound. That could have been one of it, but the tear down and the environmental costs are going to be with that. And frankly, if I'm going to put a building like this and we're going to invest in it, I'm not sure I'd do it on 1.71 acres. I would look, if we're investing 45 or 50 or 60 million dollars, I would look for 3.5 or 4 acres or someplace where we can really do it and expand it and do it the right way. I like the idea that we're working with the city, but we completely have changed all the momentum of it, and I bet you're going to have $1 million in environmental and tear down just to start off with. So
Maybe
I'm just telling you my views, but I've been asking for 6 months where we're going with this, because we were ready to get rolling if it went the other way.
maybe Anastasia, was that, the tear down cost, was that factored into the overall number you put up on the screen?
Definitely, and the building, I was in the building as well. The bathrooms are so small, they couldn't be retrofitted to ADA without a significant cost. The building isn't suitable, probably, I don't think you could get more than 30 people in there for a shelter, and we certainly couldn't separate men from women or families. So I think the existing building is not suitable for development, especially with the ADA issues. So, and I do think it would cost to retrofit it at least a few million, not, I don't think we could do it for under $1 million. That's, and the environmental costs for the Mid-Penn site, which did have some contamination of lead and asbestos. The site has a few other contaminants, I believe, and I do think you're correct, Supervisor Phillips, that the site remediation, the tear down of the building, because it does probably have asbestos and lead due to the age of the building, it would be, I agree with you, probably around $1 million, maybe slightly less if we're lucky. So,
Other questions, comments? Supervisor Salinas?
Thank you. Just a comment in terms of, where we are now. I was a while ago working with the Homeless Coalition. There was a lot of the nonprofits coming together, doing the best they can to gather data and get the HUD funding that we needed for some of the services that we had. One of the things that was missing was the political leadership from the city and the county in terms of letting the philanthropic organizations out there that we were serious about tackling the homeless issue. So with Mayor Gunther here and the council looking at this and this board saying, we want action. We don't need to know data anymore in terms of the numbers. The numbers are real, and the fact that an emergency shelter here is at capacity now means that we got to keep the momentum going. One of the things that can help also is if you get this project to the point where we get some of that housing funding or this housing bonds. I think there's some funding specifically there for transitional housing and supportive housing. So again, it'll position hopefully this project well to be able to access some of those funds. Certainly, if there's other opportunities, I would say let's keep exploring them. We certainly are going to need more in this project. This is just the beginning of saying that we're coming together, providing the direction and the leadership to start addressing the issue of the folks that don't have any place to go.
Supervisor Parker? Madam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that we're looking at a permanent shelter and permanent supportive housing. It's one of the things that I was saying from the beginning, that we have the opportunity to really do something that we can be proud of and really address a whole suite of needs. I can understand the desire to do something fairly quickly and cheaply, but we really would have just been putting a tiny Band-Aid on something and not really addressing and showing the respect that I think people deserve. I mean, to become homeless, it doesn't just happen overnight, and it isn't just one thing that happens. There's usually a multitude of factors that go into it, and so to help people get back into stable housing, it's going to take a number of supports to get there. And so, anyway, I just really appreciate the direction that this is going. Clearly, with a 2 to 3 year timeline for construction, we're not going to be, it's not going to be ready for this, the winter 2018-19. I guess clearly the shelter, the temporary shelter across the street is working well. Do we have the sense that the community is supportive of taking the time we need to do this right? I know we got a lot of pushback about locations and timing and all kinds of stuff. So I hope that it's clear that both the city and the county want to do something that is on a pretty significant scale, and we want to do it right. And I'm hoping that the outreach has been done to folks who might have concerns about the timeline.
Just to answer, I understand recently there's been some pressure being raised with the city around the site of the winter warming shelter, and I think that's a process that we'll have to begin to see, whether it stays there or whether we identify an alternative location. I will say that location has worked very well, though, and that the at least visible impact on the community has not raised any alarm bells, so I'm kind of curious what the concerns are, and see if there are ways that we can address them and continue to meet the inclement weather shelter needs of our community.
Thank you.
Supervisor Adams?
Thank you. Elliot, is it too soon to say whether or not we would keep the temporary warming shelter open until we have a permanent shelter completed?
Yes, because one reason we don't have formal direction on that yet, but I think it's certainly something that we'll have to consider both at the board supervisors and at the city level, and how do we keep that resource available for the public health and public safety of our community and our community's residents who are unhoused.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question for you as well, Anastasia. I think I might have misunderstood something that you said when you were talking about the $30 to $70 million, and that we should be afraid that, that was a 50-year sort of projection over the life of the project. Did I misunderstand, or did you say that you felt that that included the service provision, that the 30 to 70 million included the service provision as well as the construction and maintenance of the building itself?
I think the 30 to 70 million could be just the construction, very broad construction cost estimate. Like I said, the Mid-Penn Wingate Plaza development came out in the end about a little over 42 million. So if we build something larger, that did have a ground floor retail space, which in this model, I'm envisioning the shelter on the ground floor. So it could be, we were able to get 90 units in that development. So 42 million, I'm probably giving it a very high range depending on what we come up with for a request for proposal. The supportive services over time can be done through the developer would have to work on getting resources for all of the vouchers, all of the supportive services, and there's more funding coming down from the state government to fund the supportive services. When I was in Santa Monica yesterday, the city of Los Angeles put down a $1 billion bond for housing, and then the county came in with a $3 billion bond for the supportive services to go with the housing. So there are structures that we would continue to work on for permanent supportive housing services. That is the hardest part that we're hearing from our nonprofits working with homeless individuals is the supportive services. But I believe the state is addressing that, other cities, other counties are addressing it, and that's another way that I've seen it. But there's the Coalition of Homeless Services, some of the funding that they get, that goes towards the permanent supportive housing. We've been able to utilize the Emergency Solutions Grant funding. That has been increasing every year. both at the federal level and at the state level. So the state has come in with general fund and with the federal non-entitlement portion. So when we first received that allocation about 3 years ago, it was 330, and this year we're up to about 780,000. So those are ways that we can address the long-term supportive services, but the pro formas are built into the development at the time separately, but they figure it all out up front. So we would know that when they finalize all of the closing of the building and the
So
construction.
just so I can envision this then, so the ground floor would be a temporary shelter with service providers located on site. And then you kind of, like you say, people climb up the ladder, then you could go up the ladder into various floors that would have more permanent housing or maybe even transitional housing. That's it.
Yeah, permanent supportive housing is really what we're seeing is working.
Good. And other models. Super, good. Okay, thank you very much.
If I can just add a little bit. So some of the support services we would have to continue to look at, both as a county, as a city, and leveraging various federal resources, be it the Medi-Cal funding for mental health services, but also the ESG grant. So we would still have to, at some level, prioritize local funding to support and to leverage whatever federal and state resources are available. That would be a long-term annual budget commitment that we have to anticipate.
Thank you both very much.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, sir.
What- And I admit this site has some advantages, because it's near the hospital, it's near behavioral health, near the sheriff's department. And I know we looked at changing the ingress and egress, so you're not coming, and say you're coming in the site. But when we changed the view of this, and we said we're gonna go big, we're not just gonna, have we looked at any other locations? To me, if we're spending $1.5 million in environmental and tear down, and we're with a acreage of 1.7 million, and I know there's some property down on Market Street and the other one, would it make sense to look for a larger piece of property for this, where we can have and move in some other housing to it eventually? Has that been explored?
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Phillips, yes, we have actually worked, tried to work with our RMA staff on identifying the property that you spoke about that was on market is now in escrow, so it's not available anymore. We have looked at properties that have back taxes and those are falling off as well. So we're very limited in the opportunities to find, a 2 or 3 acre parcel anywhere in Salinas right now. So I know that we work for the city as well. So we have been looking at those because of the issues we've identified. Give it as an example, I think when we looked at the site on market, I think that had a trade value of about $3 million. So again, we run into the issue with properties going up as well. So.
I would just say, when we kind of got into this, we kind of promised the business community here, and we didn't get a lot of feedback when we had the temporary warming shelter, and we kind of promised them, well, this is a one-year thing, and we'll have the 1220 up and running by a year. So I think we have to do some outreach with the business community a little bit, if our proposal is to keep the old public defender's office up as continuing to be the warming shelter, because they were pretty good about, I mean, I know the mayor did a lot of work and reaching out to them, and I know I talked to some of them, and they said, hey, we can live with that. We're not going to come after you yet because it's only going to be a year. So I think we have to do some PR work.
Yeah, if I could respond also, Mr. Supervisor Phillips, I believe that's correct, and I think we need to follow up on that. But I think that I also want to say that, as part of the evaluation of the site and working with the city, it's just kind of progressing along this route because of the cost associated with rehabbing that building. As Anastasia mentioned, looking at it, how do we separate families and how do we make it a more functional facility? So when we look at everything, when we put everything together, this is where we're at this time. And I agree we will have to work with the city and the business community and kind of make this move along. Because again, as some of the supervisors have alluded to, we need to create a permanent shelter situation that really benefits this community. Because housing is a necessary benefit that we should be providing this community. So with that, I'll open it up for any other questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I also wanted to point out that the value that we have here with this property, one, is that we already agreed on it. The city and the county agreed this is a good site to make this happen. It doesn't add the extra layer of complexity or the delay in the timeline by having to look for a property, purchase it, which around here is very expensive. That property alone, you're talking about $30 million. This one's ready to go. With this plan that's already been laid out, there's no other reason for delay. We should move forward. The business associations already agreed this is a good site. The nonprofit homeless providers agreed. And we've had numerous already conversations and meetings about this particular property. There is that question that Supervisor Phillips pointed out and others as well, that at least in terms of the extension of the temporary shelter, that has to come back. The outreach has to happen, come back to us, and the city council, as it's been a 50-50 shared partnership in terms of the cost of running that shelter. But the good thing that we can stand on is that, as Elliot pointed out, there hasn't been any complaints. That there hasn't been loitering, there hasn't been any other problems, accumulation of people's stuff. I mean, it's worked out perfectly, and if anybody can stop by there when it opens at 4 o'clock and can see that people are utilizing it, and it is being well run, I think that's a testament that done the right way, with the right staffing and the right management, it can work out and be successful, and that we do have to stand on with our business partners and with the community. So I just wanted to point that out. So we'll now open this up.
I would like to publicly thank the mayor and the staff from Salinas for working with us, because I think we've come a long way, and it's been a difficult trek, but I think we're in the place. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, this is a public meeting, so we want to open it up for comments from the public. If anyone from the public would like to come, this is the time to come to the microphone and share your thoughts. What's happening?
Yes, boss.
So I got a position to kill. Seems like nobody really wants to talk to me like either. West Salinas resident, happy to see this moving forward. Thank you for all your hard work and effort. Yeah, definitely the temporary shelter is going to have to be perpetual. I think everybody knows that. So no, thank you everything for what you're doing. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'd like to see if Mayor Dutcher wants to add any last comments.
As you know, this is just a presentation. This is some ideas that are kicked around. We haven't got into the final details. We haven't talked about what will happen with the temporary shelter. We haven't talked about the final plans for Natividad Road. So I think this was just an update, and I know that everybody has a lot of questions. I look at that number, and I have a heart attack as well. It almost looks like a PERS bill up there. That doesn't scare you enough, it will. So, we look forward to moving forward and seeing what direction this final plan takes. So we have a lot of work ahead of us in the next month or so to make sure we're going in the right direction. We believe this will work. If it doesn't, then we've got to keep our eyes and ears open and make sure we do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Elliot, we've got to ask this question earlier. Just give us an update on the No Place Like Home funding. This is the $2 billion funding that was changed a bit so that it can be used for affordable housing infrastructure plus mental health services. I know it was in litigation, but that's supposed to be decided pretty soon. But I think Monterey County will be set to perhaps receive about $3 million new additional dollars for projects just like this.
That's correct. So No Place Like Home, again, if it holds up to the litigation, We'll fund the infrastructure development for permanent supportive housing, so that's one of the funding sources that could be used. My guess is also when the state housing bond is on the ballot, there'd also be resources that would be available from the state housing bond. And then, of course, there's the tax credits. Another thing with No Place Like Home, there's both a fixed community allocation, but there's also a competitive allocation, which is an important reason to pay attention to design and to the breadth of services that you incorporate. From that transition from shelter to permanent supportive housing is a best practice, which I would assume it will be a competitive component for any competitive grant that comes from No Place Like Home. But in terms of the loss of that, I don't know the current status of it.
Yeah, and that's why I just wanted to lay that out, because earlier we talked about trying to tee up projects that would be competitive when the new funding sources come online. Not to mention the SB, we mentioned earlier, actually, the SB2 funding, Senate Bill 2 for affordable housing, bond, now No Place Like Home. So for all the different reasons, if we tee this project up, this would be one of those shovel-ready projects. But it's also one of those rare projects that's a partnership between two governments and perhaps nonprofits and the philanthropic groups. I think would make it even more of an attraction to get support from the state agencies that will be rolling out those resources as well. Other comments from any other supervisors? See none. Lastly, Anastasia and Mr. Robinson, I wanted to thank you, because sometimes it really takes not only the elected official, but it takes staff really committed to move things through. And what we learn a lot, and what we learn is that there can be a lot of impediments put up to why not to do certain things. A lot of different reasons and excuses. In fact, a study came out recently that said sometimes the biggest impediment to doing affordable housing or dealing with homelessness is local governments. And they're doing a bill moving through, like David Chu, I read an article yesterday, that they wanted to take away the powers to turn down homeless shelters because it becomes so politically divisive in the community. And so those kind of services are getting off the ground because it's wrapped up in that layer of politics. So, but when I do hear, and I see staff that are saying we can do this, and despite the costs and all the work that needs to be done, you guys are doing it, presenting it, and I think that's hopeful for the community, that we can accomplish these things once and for all, not just talk, not give words only, but through actions, we can show the community we're serious about dealing with their housing and homelessness crisis. So with that,
Thank you.
very much.
I'll say.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Please.
Chair Leho, Housing Administrator of Health. I just wanted to clarify that the No Place Like Home is not necessarily new money into the county. The way that it's intended to be funded is to reduce county's Mental Health Service Act allocation by that corresponding amount and then put those monies up as a competitive process. So it's not necessarily new money. It'll be money with a different purpose available for infrastructure. And as you may know, the health department uses a Mental Health Service Act money as the local match and leverages federal dollars. So it could be more than $3 million in terms of a reduction of revenue to the county for the services that we're talking about that are so vital to support this infrastructure. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. also always corrects me on that, so thank you again. It's not new money, but it's different money because it was for mental health services, now giving flexibility for it to be used, well now moving it to be used as for housing infrastructure with the mental health component.
Do you mind if I just add one more thing?
Yes.
As counter with that? So that revenue loss to our behavioral health programs is real, which is, I think, one of the reasons that we need to put together as competitive programs as possible so that we can make up that difference with new local resources or redirected local resources and not lose our fair share.
Thank you. So I think we just need to provide, I would say, it's a presentation, but we could provide staff direction to pursue our continued partnership to move this project forward with the City of Salinas. I know they're having their city council meeting tonight and getting their presentation, but I think the message would be that we're excited about it and we look forward to partnering on this. And I think the deadline was April 17th to bring this back for a vote. And we need further action. I think that's good. So do we need a motion? So we'll make that the motion. Is there a second? So by Supervisor Salinas. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously.